Hello, this lecture is about prosody, or the song or melody in poetry. We'll be covering some terms as well as examples. So first off, we want to talk about measuring rhythm in a poem. Rhythm, of course, is the beat or tempo in a poem. So if you think of rhythm in a song, similar concept will be seen in poetry. Songs are, in fact, considered poetry for this reason. So we'll be looking at some ways to measure how that beat plays out in a poem. So the first way is to look at the feet in a poem, and a poetic foot is a measurement of syllables and stresses. So what you'll do is you look at a line of poetry and determine the number of syllables based on the number of words, and figure out which syllable in each word is stressed versus unstressed. So if something is stressed, it will be accented, it will be a heavy stress, and if it's a light stress, then it's unaccented. So it's how we pronounce the word that will show us the feet. The two kinds of feet I want you to remember are iambs and trochees. Iambs are a two-syllable foot, a light followed by a heavy, and a trochee is the opposite, also a two-syllable foot, a heavy followed by a light. So an example of an iamb would be, for example, the famous line in Hamlet, "to be or not to be," is we've got a set of three iambs there. To be, we have the light followed by a heavy stress on the syllable. And then trochees are a lot of words in the English language, actually. Something like author or early will be stressed. The first syllable will be stressed as opposed to the second syllable. Then what we do is, once we've determined the number of feet in a line, we can start talking about meter. So we've got the syllables measured out, then we can see how many feet we have, and the number of feet then corresponds to the meter. So the meters are named based on the number of feet. The one I want you to remember is pentameter, because that is the one that Shakespeare uses the most. That would be a line with 5 feet, so it'd be 10 total syllables. So when we talk about iambic pentameter, we're talking about a line with 5 iambs. That would be 5 sets of 2-syllable feet. When you are trying to measure this out in a line of poetry, we use what's called scansion. So you would take a line and you would go through and you would mark out the syllables, what are stressed, what are unstressed, and then how many feet per line. I'm not going to make you do this because it's a little bit complicated, but I just want you to know this term when we go through a line of poetry to determine where the stressed and unstressed syllables are. We're talking about scansion. So the next thing that we can talk about with prosody, so that would be the melody of the poem, we want to know about rhyme. There are several different kinds of rhyme. Everyone knows what rhyme is. That would be words that contain identical final syllables so that they match. So the different kinds of rhyme, though, we have internal rhyme. That would be rhyme that occurs within one line of poetry. So from Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe, "and so all the night tide I lay down by the side." We have tide and side in the same line in those two rhymes, so it's called internal rhyme. Eye or sight rhyme would be words that look like they probably ought to rhyme, but they don't, because they have identical spelling, but the pronunciation's not the same. So stove, prove, above, those are all different words. They don't really rhyme because the vowel sound is different, but they look like they should rhyme if you spell them out. And then we also have near rhyme. That is words that are pretty similar, not quite identical. And so a lot of times poets will sort of fudge that when they're going with the specific rhyme scheme. They'll be able to use a near rhyme as opposed to a true rhyme, so that they can, fit a word in there that makes more sense. So, for example, bleak and broke have different vowel sounds, but they're close enough that you could use them as a near rhyme. Other types of words that we want to know in prosody include how we discuss the sound that we hear. So a caesura can be used in poetry, and this would be a longer pause in a line. These are usually for some kind of effect, so the end of a thought, a dramatic pause, something like that. It's always indicated by punctuation, typically a comma, but sometimes we'll see periods, semicolons, and other forms of punctuation just to break up that line. So anytime you see punctuation in a line of poetry, you are supposed to pause when you read it. Alliteration may be a term you're already familiar with. This is the repetition of identical or similar consonant sounds. So anytime you have a line that has similarly sounding words that are matching in the consonant sound, then we have what's called alliteration. So we've got, for example, laborious, heavy, busy, bold, and blind. We have the repetition of the B sound. The opposite of alliteration, of course, is assonance, and that would be the repetition of vowel sounds. More to lull him in his slumber soft, we have a lot of rounded vowel sounds, and so that would be an example of assonance. Onomatopoeia is a word you're probably familiar with. That would be words that imitate a situation, sound, or action. Buzz, slap, stomp. Typically these types of words basically sound like the sound that the word is. So we see some onomatopoeic words used in our poems. And then our last two terms have to do with how the word sounds. So euphony would be a section of a poem that has a smooth flow of sound. They're good sounds. They're nice sounds. They feel good on the ear. So a lot of times these letters are M's and N's and L's, so the longer sounds makes the lines sound prettier. And then the opposite of euphony is cacophony, and that would be bad sounds, choppy, percussive letters, a lot of stops in the way that you pronounce it. So black bug's blood, for example, would be cacophony. So those are different ways that we can discuss the types of sounds that we hear in poetry. Obviously, to be able to do this, you have to read the poem out loud. So that's why prosody becomes so important when we're discussing song or melody in a poem. It's because we want to read that out loud. So this lecture discussion has been about prosody terminology in poetry.